All right. What's up, everyone? This is my capstone project I've been working on for the last semester. It is titled Building the Athlete First, a periodized strengthening and conditioning program for a high school dual sport athlete. So, getting into it, the table of contents, I'll kind of introduce you guys to the whole topic of everything, the paper, all the research that I did, what I found interesting, some of the things that I kind of knew about before, but then did more research on that was also very interesting to me. An annual plan that kind of ties into everything that all the paper was about, and the internship experience at Urbandale High School with Pete Trainer. So, introduction to the whole thing. It is a periodized, research-backed strength and conditioning program for a dual sport athlete. The paper kind of talks about a 16-year-old named Joe. Um, he he's fictional. He does football and wrestling, and the whole philosophy of this program is to build the athlete first. Um, we're prioritizing general physical preparedness, otherwise known as GPP, and functional movements and progressive overload before we're doing anything super sport specific because you have to be able to move, you have to be able to move your body weight and everything before you do sport specific things. And all this matters because a dual sport athlete faces a lot of very unique challenges like overlapping seasons. And that is a big thing that ties into our annual plan here, which we will get into more in depth. A lot of training plans conflict, and with playing multiple sports, there is a lot, there's a much higher chance of injury. And a lot of programs, unfortunately, they treat the weight room like a completely separate entity from the sports schedule. This one does not. It takes everything into account. It's a huge part of it is also making sure that the strength coach is in a constant communication with the sport coaches to make sure we're not double dipping. A lot of injuries will happen, so we're mitigating those. Um, it also goes into the effort model, which is a framework for helping to build culture in the weight room. Effort stands for environment, feedback, fundamentals, ownership, relationship, and training. And so it helps the culture in the weight room, like I just said, where athletes they feel seen, they feel heard. They're also challenged and they are invested in their own development just as well. Because the best lifting plan ever written will not produce results if athletes are disengaged or if they're resentful towards a coach or anyone else, or if they're just going through the motions. You have to make sure that they're putting in the effort. So moving on, the first thing that I kind of talked to, the paper is structured in like kind of chronological order in a sense. The athletes, they start as freshmen, so we talk about GPP, and they move into sophomore, junior, senior, and that's where we talk about more advanced training methods and stuff like that. So the very first thing is the first priority is building a movement foundation. So that'll be like depth drops, goblet squats, eventually getting into front squats, and a lot of single leg stability work. Because in sport, you're on one leg quite a bit. So getting into that. The 1 by 20 up here, that is a method that I have kind of learned more about, looked into, and I really enjoy it. It is one set of 20 reps where every single rep is supposed to be perfect. If that rep is not perfect, it doesn't count and you can't move on. So it helps build technique for whatever movement pattern you're doing, whether it's bench, squat, deadlift, anything. Um, it helps build tissue resilience and joint and tendon health before any heavy loads are ever introduced. So it'll help mitigate injuries and just making sure that the athlete can move first before we load up that bar. Um, and research has shown that a lot of functional training produces the biggest gains in younger athletes when combined with traditional methods. So a traditional method a lot of times is like that bodybuilding or that powerlifting, and the functional training is multi-joint and dynamic movements. So like a leg extension machine, for example, that isolates the quads and it doesn't resemble anything that happens on the football field or out on the wrestling mat. Um, a Single leg RDL though, that requires balance, hip stability, and posterior chain coordination, and that's all something that you would need out in the sport. So being able to combine those, and a simple example would be a trap bar deadlift paired with a single leg RDL, like I just said. I mean, they each work on the same thing or separate things, but then they combine to just increase everything by a lot more. And research has shown that when you combine those two, they see a lot more benefits. That was just a very simple example, but I mean, there's so many different ways that that could be applied in training. So managing training loads and overtraining as well. Um, Excessive training without proper recovery will lead to injury, burnout, and with high schoolers, hormonal disruption, which is something a lot of coaches may not take into account. So old school coaches, a lot of times, like they'll be like, we're gonna run until I'm tired or something like that. That's not exactly kind of the thing anymore. It's a lot more scientifically sound, making sure that everything is, for the athletes to making sure that they're still getting better, still enjoying it, and not just getting burnt out all the time. There's an article that I found on overtraining in school age athletes, and it confirmed that programs that are ignoring recovery and the season overlap had much higher injury rates. And as a strength coach, you must be in constant communication with all the sports coaches and be able to work with them because the practices and games and meets, they are a huge part of an athlete's weekly physical stress. And the weight room should be built around that. It should not just pile on more stress on top of it. So that is a huge portion that takes into account, and I went into depth on in my paper. So there's also advanced training methods. After a year or two of GPP work, some athletes, depending on if they can handle it, they'll move into more specialized training methods. One of them being the French contrast method, which pairs four different movements together. It'd be a heavy compound lift, a plyo, a weighted plyo, and then a reactive plyo. So it'll be like a back squat or a deadlift that's pretty heavy into a box jump, which is a body weight one, into a trap bar jump, which is the weighted plyo, into a band assisted jump, which is the reactive plyo. And so all of that it helps prime the CNS, it helps increase that force development. And there is a 6 week study done on professional soccer players where they showed significant improvements in their vertical, their top speed, and their dynamic balance. And that right there just shows how powerful this method is. Professional soccer players who are already pretty in shape are also seeing still insane improvements. And so this method is only appropriate for those athletes who have a solid base under them and that they have that ability to do these things. Some athletes may not be able to be at this point in their time. So that's kind of comes to a coaching eye as well, if an athlete can handle it or not. And the beginners, they can do modified contrast work. It can be like some sort of squat with a box jump. Very simple, but similar and the same thing. Cluster sets is another one that is to kind of help break through plateaus with strength. It's also very good for hypertrophy. So your typical hypertrophy sets and rep scheme is 4x10 with 2 to 3 minutes of rest between each set. The clusters is quite different from that. It is short intraset rest to preserve power output across the entire high volume training session. So instead of 4x10, it could be 8x5 or 10x3 or 12 by 10x4 or 12x3. It could be any one of those. There was a study done with military men who are very well trained as well, who showed that the cluster group gained significantly more strength compared to the traditional set structure of the same total volume. So they were doing the same, but one was doing the intraset rest versus traditional sets. And the people who did the clusters showed with their bench press, they had a 33-pound increase versus 20. Squats, the clusters had a 140-pound increase versus the traditional only had 106. And the vertical jump power is they increased 148 watts versus 92 watts. So obviously the traditional sets and reps is still showing improvements, but not nearly as much as what the clusters were. And the clusters also is built to maintain their power output. So, and that's huge for an athlete. You have to be able to be powerful and move things fast. So the cluster sets also takes that into account and does a very good job on keeping that um, there for the athletes. Athlete buy-in, that ties back into the effort model, which was environment, feedback, fundamentals, ownership, relationship, and training. So we'll kind of get into each one a little bit. Environment, see atmosphere of the weight room, all that matters. The music, the coach's energy, who's all coming in there, the athletes who are also bringing energy. And one way to kind of help those athletes is making lifting teams throughout the off season that train together, compete together, because individual motivation cannot match that. So it creates accountability, and it's hard to skip lifts when people are counting on you. It also just makes it way more enjoyable to push through those hard sets with teammates who are watching and supporting you. So just making the whole weight room environment much more fun, listening to fun music, whether that be country music Fridays or, you got that hard rock going on, whatever they want. Um, Moving on, feedback. That's how coaches give feedback directly. It does. It takes a toll on the athletes, and it shapes whether an athlete's improve or not. Because there are a lot of coaches who ruin sports for athletes just because they don't understand how to give them feedback, or they are just straight up mean. So the feedback has to be timely, has to be specific, and delivered in a way so that the athlete can actually understand it, so then they can get the best out of it. Another big part of this is don't be a train. This is something I've learned from Coach Schmitz. Um, Someone lives next to a train tracks. At first, they hear the train all the time, but then eventually they're going to get used to that train, and they're just not going to listen to the train anymore. So you, as a coach, you cannot always be yelling. You cannot always be saying the same thing over and over, because eventually the athletes, they're just going to tune you out. And that is a huge thing on feedback, is you cannot do that. Fundamentals, everything comes back to the movement quality. We're never skipping any foundational work, because that's what keeps the athletes healthy, and that's what everything is built on. That's what a house is built on. If your foundation is old, it's cracked, um, that house is probably going to fall in on itself. So you have to make sure you're always working on that foundational stuff so that it's healthy, the house is staying up. Ownership, athletes who feel a sense of ownership in their training, they show lower burnout rates. And so one way to help with that is every year having a goal setting meeting. Like, what do they want to do in the sport? What do they want to do in the weight room? Like, if they want to reach the 1,000-pound club or something, having those meetings with them, checking in with them is huge. So then that athlete can take ownership of their training as well. Because you know what they want to do, and they're not doing what they need to in the weight room. Say they're just jacking around. They're their goals, and you're not going to reach that if you're doing that. So another part with the ownership is you also, the coach, has to own what they're doing. So explaining the why behind a lot of programming decisions will help the athletes invest in what they're doing, versus if they're just being told what to do. So that's huge. I mean, that's something Coach Smith has also always preached, is that if you ever have a question for anything, come talk to him about it. He'll tell you why. So that's something I would continue to do in my career. Relationship, just being genuine, understanding that the athletes have a life outside of the weight room, outside of the sport, um, whether that be academic stress, injuries, family circumstances that may be going on. You want to be the kind of coach where athletes can trust that you're actually on their side, and not just someone yelling at them to lift up a bar, right? There's more to life than the weight room. So being able to be on their side in those moments, someone that they can come to, is huge. Training, the last piece of this is kind of ties everything together in my mind, is the training must be well designed and progressive, because all the culture building in the world does not replace a program that's actually making an athlete better. Um, the training is what gives the relationship and the environment their credibility. They have to be going through hard things, and they have to be able to see those improvements to buy into these. All that just ties together, and it is huge on culture in this sense. So the other thing that kind of tied back into this is the annual plan. This is something where um, the big picture of the whole annual plan is, what does the athlete need right now to be better or healthier when it matters most? So it's broken into phases that shift the training focus based on the time of the year and the competitive calendar. So this quote here is huge for an annual plan. The will to win is important, but the will to prepare is vital. So going into that here, I'll take you through this. It starts off, in the beginning of January, where the athlete is wrestling. So they're in the competitive stage right here, right? So it's winter, whatever. They got their meets right here, their duels, competitions, tournaments, and these parts right here would be like notes I would take from here, and I'd make it bigger in the actual thing. But emphasis, tempo, training weeks. I mean, how many times of the week are they lifting? All this stuff is planned out. Their active rest or deload based load. The whole year long calendar down here is where they're working around. Okay. So right now, say they're in wrestling season. Actually, let's go down to over here where we would be now. So they're in the off season right now, right? And this time of the year, they'd be the off season hypertrophy and strength. So they'd be going through here, moving along, getting bigger, getting stronger, stuff like that. All right, then we move through. They would do their power testing on the vertical velocity based training thing, stuff like that. They're lifting 4 days a week, running 4 days a week. It's a hard time for these athletes. They're going through the whole off season. Then it transitions into the summer. A lot more sport specific movements. Got to make sure they're being powerful and fast with that weight. And then towards the end of the summer, we are PRing. We're testing everything, making sure we're getting a lot of those numbers up. Then we're coming back to active rest here, right before camp. Okay. So during camp time, right at the beginning of August, we want to keep these athletes maintaining their strength and power and staying healthy. That's the biggest thing. So as you can see right here, all they're doing base work, base, 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 and then they'll deload right before their season starts. And then they have to remember to they still have to reach that stimulus throughout the season. So they're still going to be peaking at separate times, deloading, base, load, peak. Because if they're not reaching that stimulus, they're going to lose everything that they worked for over that off season. So we have to keep them healthy. We have to keep them peaking so we are still seeing that maintaining. Once the football season's over, you can see that they've had all their weeks, all their games, their playoffs. They have about a week off right before this athlete goes into his wrestling season, where it's the same thing: maintain strength and power and keep athletes healthy. It's the biggest thing. They have to be healthy, otherwise they're not competing. So throughout the seasons, you see here, they're practicing every day, but then they're also lifting 2 times a week, and they have one recovery day. Same thing over here with wrestling. Coming back over to the start of the year, same exact thing: 2 to 3 lifts per week. They're not running and making sure that they're just staying healthy. So then the off season, say right here, he's done with wrestling. He did really well in the tournament. He's got a week off, and then we're right back into work. We're working again, 1 by 20, building up that tissue resilience, making sure we're fixing up any injuries that they had throughout the year, doing isometrics to get the muscle recruitment back up, and just moving on. Developmental and hypertrophy, continuation from the 1 by 20, but it's considered their hell week kind of. That's going to be a lot of mental toughness, some eccentrics. It's going to be tough, and this is where they're going to see a lot of improvements. Hypertrophy is huge because you have to have that muscle to get bigger, faster, and stronger and more powerful. So we spend a lot of time in hypertrophy, so then they can get more powerful. So all this stuff here, a lot of notes you can take, has a full calendar and when they're in season down here. So this would be wrestling. Here's football down there, football, wrestling. Just takes into account preparing for everything that can happen through this athlete's time as an athlete. So done with that. My internship experience, I really enjoyed it. I was with Pete Trainer, this guy here on the left. He used to coach here at Simpson for I don't know when that was, but he was here for a little while. He's also a former NFL player. He played for the Packers back in the early 2000s as an offensive lineman, which is pretty cool. Didn't know that at first, but it was fun seeing the some of the kids come in there. He had a football card of him and he had him sign it and everything. I thought that was pretty cool. He's just a very accommodating guy. He's laid back. I think that's just because he has put in that work in the weight room now, so people know the expectations on when they get in there. They use the team builder app, so they each have iPads in there. They just sign in there, and then the athlete themselves goes through their card on the app, and it's pretty easy for him because he just runs the warm up, runs the fly 10 times and everything like that, and then they just go lift, and it's he's pretty much done after that. There were a lot of times where I would just go up there and work on homework and that annual plan we kind of just went through, and I would just talk to him. I mean, I learned a lot from him. He's pretty cool. Um, there were other PE coaches in there that just kind of, made sure it's a very big weight room. So it just kind of made sure that nothing was really happening, but all the athletes were pretty good about getting their stuff done. Um, he also has all the new kids that come into this class because they lift throughout the day. Um, all the new kids that have never lifted before, they go through a thing called boot camp. And me and him were leading that. And eventually I got into leading that all by myself. Um, and it's just pretty much taking them through every single movement with a PVC pipe or a 35-pound bar and just making sure that they're doing everything correctly. Kind of like the 1 by 20 thing a little bit, but um, just every rep is perfect. It's just not 1 by 20. I also started running the runs in the gym, and I found that was pretty fun. You have to make it competitive and everything because you know, the athlete, the boys especially, they like competing with each other and talking a little bit of smack with each other, and it was fun. Um, One thing I did notice and something that I would do differently is every single day I was in there, they did the same exact warm up. And for me, it just got very repetitive, but it's good warm up. He does the RPR as well. And um, I mean the athletes, they still listened and everything. They did everything wrong or everything correctly. And if someone did do something wrong, they corrected it right away, which that was pretty cool to see. Another thing I just didn't like about it is the drive up there. There's a lot of gas money, but it was worth the time being up there with him. So that was my internship experience. Thank you guys for listening. And here are all of my citations.